course. Taxi operators at the moment only allowed to run at 70% capacity. The taxi industry also has wanted a subsidy from government for many, many years, and at the same time, like everyone else, they're suffering deep financial distress caused by the lockdown and COVID-19. Ayanda-Allie Paine is the spokesperson for the Transport Minister, Fikile Mbalula. Ayanda, good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time on Newsfeed this afternoon. How did you arrive at the figure of 1.1 billion rand for the taxi industry?
Well, Stephen, you'll know that first and foremost, we had to look at the confines of what Treasury is able to dispense by way of assistance. Well, the initial figure was 800 million, in fact, that we had budgeted for, that we were able to wiggle out of the Department of Finance. But we then, subsequent to that, to try to increase it somewhat, because we had to take into consideration the size of the industry and that there are other people who are involved, not just operators. There are queue marshals, there are those who work in the associations, there are those who don't necessarily have operating licenses but have what we call slips. So having considered all of that, we were able to move the figure slightly somewhat to 1.135 billion. Of course, the taxi industry not pleased at all with that figure. They are not satisfied with it. And I think it's important for us to note that it's not meant to be a rand for rand compensation for their losses during COVID-19, but it is assistance, it's relief, it's an ex gratia payment, just for us to say we have noted the hardships that you're in. Here's a helping hand, as it were.
I mean, I think the last figure I can see is around 200,000 minibus taxis being operated in South Africa. That's a Santaco estimate of about 2 years ago. R1 billion doesn't actually go very far at all.
Not at all, Stephen. And, if possible, all of us would be in agreement to say if we could give more, we would. Remember that these discussions and consultations were between the Department of Transport. We factored in National Treasury. We also spoke to small businesses, Department of Trade, Industry and Competition to try and see what can be done. And so it was in agreement that some sort of assistance must be given, but even that assistance cannot be compensation because we do not have the funds. And I don't want to speak on behalf of Treasury, but I can for sure tell you that the fiscus could not handle a rand for rand payment, first and foremost, and also couldn't handle the 20,000 rand per taxi that Santaco was asking for 3 months. So this payment is a once-off payment just as a relief assistance.
So the taxi associations reject the figure. They say it's not enough. I think your heart is kind of with them, but your head tells you how little money government has. Where do we go from here? I mean, is there any kind of negotiation? Are you worried about further action?
Look, discussions between the taxi industry and the Ministry of Transport have always been ongoing prior to COVID-19, during the outbreak, as well as where we're finding ourselves now, possibly looking at easing some of those regulations somewhat. So I think what we can say is that we're appreciative of the industry's willingness and goodwill in their negotiations. So those discussions continue. But we stay away from the use of the term negotiation because it implies that there is some sort of a forced payment that is compulsory, that must be given. It almost sounds like a salary negotiation, as it were. And we opted rather for the term discussion, so that we can say that we bring forward the amount that is available, and we left it to the industry to divide the spoils, as it were. We said to them, how much would you like to give to the queue marshals? How much would you like to give to the association? How much would you give to operators? In fact, it was their idea to say, even those who don't have operating licenses or permits that are valid, but have rather what is called slips, right? They have a receipt to say we've applied, but we don't have the permit yet. They should also be compensated, right? They should be not compensated at least, but assisted. So they're the ones who came through that information, and we're happy that the doors of communication have always been wide open. We are looking forward to even more discussions coming up on Tuesday with the minister, on Wednesday also with the minister. And we are actually at a point where we're saying there's no need for talks of a shutdown. There's no need for talks of any disruptions in the sector. Our doors are always open to say, how can we assist? We met with the finances, for example. The minister's going to look to speak to the banks. We've spoken to SA Taxi Finance to say, how do you give a reprieve or a payment holiday? I think what's important is we all work together to find a solution here.
I mean, in the end, what this is really caused by, apart from the fact that it's caused by a virus that none of us can stop and no one wanted in South Africa and no one worked to bring it to South Africa, is the fact that is the regulation around 70%. And the taxi operators have said that if they normally carry, say, 10 to 15 people at 70% capacity, in other words, you're looking at maybe 10, 11, 12 passengers, they simply aren't even beginning to break even at that point. Although I notice many of them are still operating, which is an interesting question to ask. Do you believe that there's any chance that that regulation could change? And I imagine that your counterparts in the health department are going to say, well, actually, we can't change that regulation for some time to come.
Look, 100%. You know, the minister has said that initially when we came forward and spoke about full licensing capacity of the taxi operators, he had to rescind that decision even before we could implement in a matter of hours because of those health concerns. A lot has changed since then, Stephen. You'll know that masks are now compulsory. Back then, they were not. You'll know that at the moment we've got increased capacity, for example, to sanitize your taxi ranks, to deep cleanse those taxi ranks. We have more facilities that are able to assist. And so things have changed. We are beginning to look at those discussions and revisit that negotiation or conversation about 100% carrying capacity, license capacity, that is, for the taxi industry. So that is something that the minister at his level will be discussing with his counterparts, will be bringing before the NCCC to see whether or not it can help. Also, very quickly, we know that some of the taxi associations will be hiking the fares. They promised us that those increases will be something that is manageable, that will not put the poor at a disadvantage, and that would not be exorbitant. So looking at perhaps a slight increase in fees, looking at other ways that the taxi industry could generate funds, and the small ex gratia payment, we're hoping that the industry will be able to stay afloat. And of course, Minister's discussion with the finances to give the industry a bit of a reprieve.
I mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation, Ayanda, that it was a very important part of the context that the taxi industry has actually been looking for a government subsidy for quite some years. I imagine that's not on the table at this moment. The Finance Minister, Stephen Grootes, delivering an emergency budget for the first time, I think, in our democratic history on Wednesday. You go to him and say, please, can we have a subsidy for the taxi industry? He's going to say, no.
Look, you know, when we speak about formalization of the taxi industry, it's such a pity because these were discussions that the minister had a year ago when he came into office. I mean, he brought the taxi industry together through Santaco. He started having conversation with the provinces as well to say we need to have a national indaba and discuss the professionalization of the industry, discuss having drivers on UIF, have a minimum wage or salary for the taxi drivers. See how we could be more tax compliant.
Oh, dearie me, we haven't seen the test pattern in quite some time. Ayanda-Allie Paine, I do apologise. Sorry about that. Seem to have lost signal to you there. All right, thank you for the update, though, on what's happening with the taxi industry.